Welcome to ATSA's Backchannel, expert conversations about sexual abuse, treatment, and prevention. I'm Alejandro Leguízamo, your host, and it is my pleasure to welcome today Dr. Nimrod Shanee, who is a clinical psychologist in Israel. He obtained his doctorate in 1998 from Bar-Ilan University, and he is also a diplomat in the treatment of diagnosis of sexual offenders. He is the founder and clinical manager of New Beginning Treatment and Diagnosis Center for Offenders of all types in Tel Aviv. This center was founded in 2010. The center is the biggest ambulatory treatment center for sexual offenders in Israel. The center routinely treats around 100 sex offenders within group and individual therapy. He's also a major consultant on risk assessments for the public defense system since 2008. He's a leader of innovations in treatment and risk assessments in Israel and has introduced new risk assessment tools and new treatment techniques, such as for those who are in categorical denial. His treatment is based on the Good Lives model and experiential groups. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Shanee to the podcast.
Okay.
So thank you, Nimrod, for joining me. I am very excited for our viewers to be able to learn about what you're doing out there in Israel. We tend to be very concentrated on North America, Europe, and Oceania, but we know very little about what's going on in other places. So I'm very grateful that you agreed to come and talk to us.
My pleasure.
So could you tell us what you're doing? What is the setup in Israel? The population that you tend to see?
Yeah, I'll talk about demographics first, since it will give the overall picture, and after that I'll speak about what we're doing in Israel. First, it needs to be clear that Israel is actually an immigrant state. Through different periods, people came here during several immigration tides and happenings. Basically, the population now in Israel is divided to Jews mostly, which are 75% of 9 million people. And there are around 22% Arabs. The rest is from other origins, people that come here like refugees from Africa and other places. Basically, the Jewish population is also very diverse, and it's divided to secular Jews, which are the majority. It's roughly around, again, 70-75%. There is very religious Jews, which are around 16% or 18%, and the rest are in between. And not even that, we have also the Arab population is divided to mostly Muslim, but some are Christian Arabs. So it's really very diverse. We have to attend to a lot of not only religions, which are a bit different, but cultures which are different, because in the Jewish community, we have people that originated in Europe. That was the first immigration waves that came from Europe, and also the Americas. I mean, mostly North America, but also from South America. And parallel to that, we have a lot of Jews that came from Middle Eastern countries, which have a very different culture. You can see it also, especially I think you can see it in not only in customs, but also in the way that people handle food and the way that people listen to music. I mean, it's really very diverse, and therefore we deal with people that are coming and like in a melting pot. There are a lot of issues to handle. Now, about Israel itself and sex offenders, basically, there is a very this is an issue that draws a lot of attention, media-wise and in courts and in legislation. I think even before Me Too and all other projects like that, there was a movement in Israel of people that came forward and spoke about the way that they were offended sexually. After that, there was another wave of celebrities that talked about it in the media and opened it even much more. There is very, I mean, it's more towards now creating legislations and laws that can protect the public from further sexual offending. And I think that it works because it has several issues that the law handles. One issue is, of course, the issue of supervision. Every person that has committed a sex offense and is being convicted in court, basically when they finish their legal process, either they finish their imprisonment if they have imprisonment, or either if they do not have any kind of imprisonment, they finish their legal process, they are sent to a risk assessment. The risk assessment is done in one center in the country. It's from the Ministry of Health. That's their responsibility. And according and based upon the risk assessment, the person is assigned to supervision of some sort. Now, I know that in many countries there is registration laws, and people are they need to, tell the people around them, their surroundings, that they are sex offenders. It's well known. In Israel, it's different. People that are under supervision usually are, of course, people that are above low risk, and they are assigned to a supervision officer. The supervision officer comes from a unit. That's their job. They are actually the people that are, after they go through some kind of court discussion, they get conditions that they have to follow. And the conditions are based upon their offenses and their risk. For instance, people that are known to have offended against children are not allowed to go around schools, are not allowed to be in the vicinity of children without some adult that knows about their offense, for instance. Others which offended using internet or chats by phone are not allowed to use internet in such a way, and so forth. I mean, there's usually the conditions are connected to the offense, and these people are under surveillance. I mean, the supervision officer goes, some of them in much higher density, but follows them, goes to their working place, goes to their living places, and they simply follow them. That is one part of it, the supervision part. Usually it's based on several years. I mean, the law dictates that up to 5 years a person can get a supervision warrant like that. Usually most of them get between 2 to 3 years. Some of them they extend it to 5 years. And when it gets to 5 years, if their risk assessment is still high, then they get another warrant. If it's below that, the warrant stops. But if it's higher, then it goes to another, sometimes another 5 years, and it's up to 20 years. This can happen. The law started to be implemented in 2006. So roughly we are 15 years into it by now. And there are some people that are under supervision. I mean, not a lot, but there are. Another thing that I can say that the supervision level really lowered down reoffending in very, very precise numbers. I mean, it's not clear to say, but because there are offenses that are not documented, but according to their formal in the media data, it lowered around to 1%, around 1%, 1.6, which is quite low because we started with 19 before the law was implemented. So it really works. However, it's sometimes in the face or in the eyes of the professional people, sometimes it's a bit extreme, because it looks like a lot of people that shouldn't be supervised actually get supervision. It's like more built on fear of what might happen than actually the risk assessment of the person. Another way that you can see it is that fewer people get released on conditional release in Israel from prison. I mean, if before several years you could see sexual offenders getting a treatment plan and going to the board, to the parole board, and ask them to be released, they would be released. Now it's very hard if you're a sex offender to get released from prison. Usually they serve the whole time. And it's all kinds of reasons. I mean, the person really doesn't get away from it. If his risk is low, then they say he didn't do enough treatment, or he's too his behavior is not okay. If his risk is high, then his risk is high. We can't release him. So there are a lot of reasons why that are attributed to why people are not released. Very few sex offenders are released before the completion of the whole sentencing. Beyond that, that is one part, the risk assessment and the supervision. The second part is treatment. And since the law is started to being applied, treatment centers have been constructed around the country. A lot of private practices were diverted into more formal. They are supervised by the state. The welfare office is the office that is responsible for that. And they're doing the best they can. I mean, they built centers all around Israel. Israel is not that big. However, we have several areas in the country. A lot of centers are in the middle part of the country, where Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, which are the main cities. Some are in the north, very few are in the southern part, which is more desert-like, but still there is a lot of population there. And they try to make places which are designated for specific populations, which means some centers are directed to people that have special needs in education, special needs in behavior. Some centers are more to the psychiatric populations, which are also sex offenders. There was once a trial, I think that failed, was to make a place for people that deal with drug abuse and addiction. And there is also for specific populations like the Haredic population, which is the very religious, extremist religious population. I know at least of one center that that's their population, that's what they're dealing with. However, they are dealt also with major centers, other major centers. Yeah, that's basically it. If you have questions, of course.
Yeah. One of the things that that has struck me, the level of supervision reminds me of research that was conducted in Canada based on what they call conscientious probation officers. So there were probation officers that were very mindful about the people in their supervision, and they conducted assessments as well at the stable and acute, and got their the recidivism rate dropped to about 1% as well.
I understand.
But my question is, what was what was kind of like the nature of the supervision? Was it supervision that was it kind of like supportive supervision, or sort of like oh my God, you know, there's the officer behind me, I kind of like better like behave kind of supervision?
Yeah, I think it's both.
Okay.
There some of the supervision officers are not trained professionals. They are guards from prisons that were simply assigned to this unit. Okay, so they are more like police officers than professionals. However, some of them are really warm people, and they are trying to be very supportive. We know of people that sometimes the supervision officers, they're only as if family or person that they can relate to, have their social network. Some people face supervision officers which are more, or I can say less sensitive to their needs, and more creating, I mean, it's not a thing that is supervised itself. I mean, one question that we did raise, who is supervising the supervision officers? Because at sometimes it looks like they don't know what they're doing. They go to a person, they told them, listen, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't have sex. It's not written in anywhere, but they decided it. And some people have really difficulties with it. Other people, as I said, are really more professional in that sense, and are more attentive to the needs, and I think that they can, the more professional the supervisor officer is, they know that they shouldn't bug on people which have lower risk, when should go more for the people that are really in high risk, because some people in high risk, it's very few, but there are some people that keep on offending, and then they do it underneath the nose of the supervision officer without even noticing. So it's a bit complicated in that sense. Yeah.
Of course. I know we had talked a little bit before about the different populations and how they presented, and so full disclosure to the viewers, we had chatted a little bit before, and we had touched upon some of the different populations and the types of offenses, and there was one that really struck me about the very religious individuals and the type of offenses and the cultural variables at play. And wondering if you could share with the audience a little bit about that, and maybe there's some like researchers with lots of resources watching, so that we can get some research going on this issue, because it's really, really, really interesting.
Okay, I'll speak about the more extreme religious people. There are all kinds of restrictions in that specific society, which is very closed. I mean, they have, I wouldn't call it ghettos, but they have special places in towns and in specific towns that's their community. That's where they live. I think it's also in New York, by the way. I'm not sure, but
oh yeah, in Brooklyn.
Yeah, specific districts where the whole population is from that side, and mainly they have strong ideas about the division between women and men. I mean, men and women cannot be in the same vicinity, cannot stay in one room together, for instance, one woman and one man. And what happens is that most of the kids that are being usually taught in such manner, I mean, during their schools or the yeshivas, simply do not interact at all with women outside their family circle. Now, what happens then is that their sexual attraction during the period where they become very sexually aware starts to be diverted to men, especially young men at their age. Some of that, and I don't think it's because they have any kind of homosexual orientation. I think it's based upon what they have in front of them and the urges that appear. And one thing that we do see sometimes, we see quite a lot, is that such men do not or hardly offend against minor girls. They offend against minor boys. And you can see this trend, it really goes in a way that it's very clear that their orientation is to boys which are young, and some of it is based upon any kind of sexual experience that they had when they were in the yeshivas, for instance. It's not all of them, but it's quite a majority, I think, at least what we see. Another thing that we do see is that sometimes there is very high percentage of sexual deviation in the attitudes to sex, and sex is something that they do not speak about in the religious society. It's a issue that is not dealt with. It's not talked about. And even when it's talked about, there is a lot of ignorance around it. We can see a lot of cases where sexual deviation appears. It can start from pedophilia, goes to all kinds of coprophagia, and we had a guy in Jerusalem, for instance, that his deviation was to go and cut hairs from girls. He would walk around the street, he would find a simply stranger girl and would cut her hair with his scissors. That was his idea of probably of sexual orientation. And it's part of, the thing that sex is not talked about, not clear to them, not a thing that, not an issue that is normative. You can do it in specific conditions after you're married, and only after you're married You do it in a specific way. It's not done like in an open way. Now, it's not, I'm now very generalizing, and I need to be very clear. I am generalizing for this whole population, but I see a lot of these things, especially in this population. And you can see that in the more secular, it's more like normative sexual offenses, and less heavy on what I talked about, basically.
Yeah, this is fascinating because there's I've done a little bit of research on. There has been a little bit of research here in the U.S. about ethnic differences in paraphilias or problematic sexual arousal, and some with juveniles. And I did one preliminary with adults, and we saw whites in European Americans here in the U.S. Appear to show more paraphilic behaviors. And we have been racking our brains trying to figure out why that is. Is it a matter that other populations don't report it? Is it something that is more protective about minority cultures here? And there has been actually some research here about religiosity being a protective factor against sexual offending. And I was chatting with a friend actually yesterday about this, and who was telling me about these findings. And perhaps it seems that the issues, the taboo around sex and such charge around it, because we have in the U.S. we have very, very religious communities, evangelicals, fundamentalists that have very, very specific opinions about sex, but it appears to be a little bit freer. Nothing before marriage, of course, but then afterwards there's a little bit more freedom, it appears. But we were wondering about this issue of if there's such taboo around sex, and there's also the power differential or the privilege, more so in the U.S. too, but also in between the genders, and also from adults to minors, whether that is a combination that perhaps we need to take a look into, because it's really fascinating that they go from taboo to really developing really problematic or paraphilic interests that may not have developed otherwise.
Yeah, I can tell you, the one of the populations that is interesting is the women population. And when you look at the women that are sex offenders, which are it's really a very minority of the population, you see sometimes huge differences between people that are more secular or religious light women and women which are more into the extreme in religion. And see is that the more the person is extreme religious, the offenses are much more aggressive and are much more as if not normative. I mean, you can see, for instance, I'll give you an example. You see several women that were convicted for sexual offending against their students. And when you look at the description of the way that she describes it, the way it's written in the indictment itself, it is described as if a love story, a love story, very like teenage love story, very light, not very heavy. And when you look at very religious women, that we had several cases like that. It's much more encompassing. It's much more manipulative. It's less a love story. It's much more some kind of a person that simply takes the inferiority of the person in front of them and uses it to the full extent. And again, it's part, I think, of the taboos, because sexual relations in the religious society are very strict. It doesn't have any kind of homosexual or lesbian attitude. I mean, even though there are some that deal with this issue, it's much more strict. There is, I think, also in other countries, there is a big role against conversion therapies, for instance, which are applied in the religious, extreme religious situations, which people try to convert people from being homosexual to be heterosexual. It's another thing that you can see in, a lot in secular, because there is really the public opinion against it is very clear. Yeah, that's it.
It goes to show the power issues in this type of offending, and also like what may constitute almost like a very significant rebellion against the limitations and the cultural roles of women, and it's that's the great thing about this field, is that there's never a dull day. I mean, it would be nice if we were out of a job, but it's never a dull day. Now, for the individuals who are very religious, or whether Jewish or Muslim, is there any incorporation or consultation with religious leaders in order to facilitate treatment?
Sometimes, usually to enroll people into treatment, because a lot of religious people look to to the person that is leading them in the spiritual level, and they seek for their advice. In these instances, sometimes we have the cooperation of people like a rabbi that will call me and will ask if we'll be willing to receive a person for treatment. And there's a cooperation with that. So yes, there is sometimes. And I can tell you also that if the rabbi is not approving of the therapy, it will not take place, and people will not go into therapy. Now, it's when you look at the Arab population, I think that our understanding of what goes there is even lower than what we know about the Jewish population. Arab culture is different. It doesn't have only the religious issue, but also a lot of the pride, the family pride. And there are a lot of violent offenses, which are not sexual, but against women, that people inside the family think that that woman specifically, damaged the family pride and did something which is against that. And you can see a lot of murders around that. And it's clearly from a different angle of looking at, relationships between men and women. Women are less equal in this situation, or less their voice is less heard. I think that this is an issue that should be handled with people from Arab orientation, and that they are familiar with these rules. I can tell you that in my center, we don't deal only with sex offenders, we deal also with offenders in general. And at certain point, we saw that it's very important to divide sometimes the Jews and the Arabs in such groups of violence, because the understanding of violence is different when you look at it from their angle. They understand it in a different way, they look at it in a different way, should handle different cognitive distortion in that sense, which for in Jews' eyes it's very clear, but in their eyes it's the total opposite. So I think that's, you need to be sensitive in that sense also. Yeah.
And I can imagine how complicated it would be to even to try to have discussions about some critical assessment of the culture, given how intertwined it is with faith. Here we typically deal with when we have clients from Latin America, where the social practices can be very different, particularly in rural areas. Adults having sexual contact with teenagers. At times and historically, it has been not only accepted but encouraged, because then there will be a marriage, and the girl would be paired together with a man that was economically settled, and it was beneficial. Not necessarily the best of circumstances. I can tell you, my grandparents in Mexico fell into this category. They were married in the 20s though, so that was a long time ago. But in rural areas, this still takes place, and then they migrate here, and they engage in that behavior, and then they are imprisoned because it's a sexual offense here, and it's actually a sexual offense over there as well. It's just not prosecuted. But I think it's a little bit easier to have a conversation about the culture and the differences in life experience and power between the adult and the teenager. But having the very, very deep cultural and religious rules, I can just imagine how difficult it would be to convey that. And unfortunately, it also leads to many victims not reporting anything because their lives could be at stake. And unfortunately, that happens in many countries. So how, once the person is back in the community, how are they received in the community?
Basically, I want to address, first of all, what you said just now.
Okay, sure.
Because I think as treatment providers, we try our best to not, force our own way of looking at things and changing customs of religious people or other people that are religious, not religious, but are accustomed according to any kind of culture. What we try to do is we try to speak about the human level, basically on human values of love and appreciation, and values that are, I think, most people do have the same values, even though they are not being followed into the practice in the same way. And we try to show them, without condemning their behavior, what are the prices that they pay, what is the cost of that behavior, and what are the gains, so they can choose what to do. We cannot force them to, for instance, religious people are not allowed to masturbate. And sometimes masturbation is a good way in order not to offend against someone, is to do it with yourself without handling anyone else forcefully. So we try our best to be sensitive to their customs. We appreciate it. We do not condemn it. We don't try to tell them what to do, but we do show them the benefits and the costs of any kind of behavior. And it's their choice. I see a lot of people that are in treatment and they have a realization and they understand how they can do things in a different way that is not harmful for others, but do take in their needs into account also. Because basically, customs, religions, cultures, we're talking about human beings and we're talking about relationships. And that is much more general, I think, than anything else. Now to the second question, or the question that you asked, basically when a person goes back into the community, there are several possibilities. Again, if the person is above low risk, he will be supervised for sometimes several years, sometimes much more, sometimes less. But beyond that, we do offer people treatment. And it's part of the supervision's initiative also to offer people to go into treatment. We do not, the treatment is not mandatory. People can choose to go into it and choose not to. It's just the same about also medications that lower the sexual drive. People are not forced to take them. We can, consult them. We can advise them. We can let them consult with a psychiatrist or any kind of medical person that is well versed and knows the effects and how it works. But they're not obligated to do that. Some of them enter treatment. The treatment is long. I mean, in my center, there are, I think this is the biggest center in Israel that treats sex offenders in the community. We have roughly around 100 to 120 sex offenders in our care routinely. Most of them are in groups, in treatment groups. Some of them are also in individual therapy, parallel to the group, sometimes not inside the groups. We have several stages, specifically in my center. The first stage is much more a stage of getting familiar with the treatment. It's more psychoeducational. We do not confront them with their sex offenses. Some of the people are people that deny doing the offenses. We do not try to make them, admit it in order to get into treatment. It's more general sense. We give them tools which are cognitive based, CBT, and we try to give a supportive environment for people that are also in treatment during their legal process, some of them before they enter prison, some of them just after they finish imprisonment, so they can come back to community and feel more welcomed and less, around and stressful. The second part is much more treatment oriented to the offense cycle and understanding the offense cycle, understanding relapse prevention strategies, getting familiar with risk factors, and especially with a program, a practical program of what to do and what not to do in order to get there. This is when you get into treatment, this part is the most important part from the state's level. I mean, the welfare really looks at this part as the most critical part. There is the last part, which is the C part, the treatment, which deals with something else. And that is the Good Lives model. It's more oriented to opportunities and how creating your life fulfilled and better. In a sense, it's very different from the first or the second stage, which deals with the offense and what happened and risk factors. It's actually built on this free stage therapy. Some people go through groups more than once. In order to be, sometimes they come and they're ready, and sometimes they're not. The population that I have in my center is very diverse. It's from religious people to secular, sometimes Arab, sometimes I didn't speak about all of the immigrants, but we have a lot of Russian immigrants and Ethiopian immigrants that are also in therapy. I can say that the state is very generous. A person that wants to get into therapy is fully funded by the state, and they look at it. And even another thing is, sometimes a person finished their parole period or finished their supervision warrant, and they're not obligated to do any therapy or any treatment, but the state allows them to continue to get treatment and get funded if they want to and if they wish to. And we have people around 3 to 3.5 years, sometimes in therapy, sometimes even longer in much more critical cases or acute cases. Yeah, I think that's mainly it in that sense.
And it is such a nice luxury to be able to have long-term treatment. After all, this is a very complicated phenomenon, and it does require a lot of time to be able to tease out everything.
Yeah.
I think our time is up, and it's nice to end in that positive note. I again would like to really thank you from the bottom of my heart, Nimrod, for joining me in this very interesting conversation, and I hope that it raises a lot of issues for the viewers, and very interesting things that hopefully we can explore more. Okay.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us in this episode of ATSA's Backchannel. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you wish. And don't forget to visit atsa.com if you haven't already. I'm Alejandro Leguízamo. Until next time, take care.